A tense arrangement. In the glimmering halls of the Crolian palace, Princess Zara stood before her parents, King Aldrich and Queen Lyra, her iridescent scales flickering with barely restrained outrage. An arranged marriage. To a human. Zara's voice was tight with disbelief. You cannot be serious. King Aldrich's crest rose in a display of regal authority. The Galactic Alliance insists upon this union as a symbol of unity between our kinds. The treaty is too important, Zara. You must think of our people. Zara's tail lashed, betraying her agitation. She was known throughout the Crolian Empire for her fierce pride in her heritage, and her disdain for the upstart humans was equally notorious. I am thinking of our people, Zara hissed. How can we trust the humans? They're volatile, unpredictable. They'll dilute our bloodline, corrupt our ways. There must be another path to peace. Queen Lyra glided forward, her scales shimmering with maternal concern. My daughter, we have weighed every option. This is the way. The human they have chosen, Jack Sawyer, is a respected diplomat. A good match. A good match. Zara scoffed. He's a primitive brute, no doubt. I won't do it. I won't mate with a human. King Aldrich's voice boomed through the chamber. You will. For the good of the Crolian people, for the sake of the galaxy, you will. Zara recoiled as if struck, her scales flashing through a dizzying spectrum of colors. She knew that tone. It was the voice of a king, not a father. Her fate, it seemed, was sealed. Light years away, on the bustling human capital world of Terra Prime, Jack Sawyer stood at rigid attention before the Galactic Alliance Council. His military bearing was evident in every line of his tall, muscular frame, but his eyes held a diplomat's thoughtful analysis. Ambassador Sawyer, the counselor began, her voice grave. We have called upon you to undertake a mission of vital importance to the stability of the Galactic Alliance. Jack inclined his head respectfully. I am ready to serve, counselor. The counselor leaned forward, her holographic form flickering. You have been chosen to represent humanity in an arranged marriage with Princess Zara of the Crolians. This union will cement the treaty between our kinds. Jack blinked, the only outward sign of his surprise. An arranged marriage. To an alien princess known for her anti-human stance. It was a daunting prospect. But Jack Sawyer had never backed down from a challenge. I understand, counselor, he said firmly. I will do my duty, for Terra Prime and for the Alliance. And so, the stage was set. A princess filled with resentment, a soldier turned diplomat, two disparate souls bound by the needs of their people. As their paths moved inexorably toward each other, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Would this arranged union bring harmony or hasten the very war it sought to prevent? Only time would tell. First contact. The grand ballroom of the Crolian Palace was a resplendent sight filled with dignitaries from 100 worlds. But for all the grandeur, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the room. At the center of it all stood Princess Zara, resplendent in her ceremonial regalia. Her scales shimmered under the lights, a mesmerizing display of color and texture. Yet her posture was rigid, her expression carefully controlled. Beside her, Jack Sawyer cut an imposing figure in his dress uniform, the medals on his chest a testament to his distinguished service. But despite his calm exterior, Jack's mind was racing, analyzing every detail of the room, every nuance of the alien faces around him. As the music swelled, Jack turned to Zara, offering his hand in a gesture that transcended species. Princess Zara, may I have this dance? Zara hesitated, her eyes narrowing. The idea of touching a human, of allowing him to lead her in a dance, it was almost too much to bear. But the eyes of the galaxy were upon her. She had a duty to perform. With a curt nod, she placed her hand in his, suppressing a shiver at the alien warmth of his skin. Slowly they began to move, their bodies finding a rhythm that seemed to bridge the chasm between their worlds. As they danced, Jack leaned in, his voice low. I understand this arrangement is not what either of us would have chosen, Princess. but I believe we can find a way to make it work, for the good of both our peoples." Zara's scales rippled, a sign of her inner turmoil. She had expected empty platitudes from this human, not this frank acknowledgement of their situation. "You speak of understanding, Ambassador Sawyer," she replied coolly. "But what can a human truly understand of the Crolian ways?" To her surprise, Jack smiled. "More than you might think, Your Highness. I have made a study of your culture, your customs, the way you use the ripple of your scales to express emotion, for example." Zara blinked, caught off guard. She had assumed this human would be ignorant, uninterested in learning about her kind. Perhaps there was more to Jack Sawyer than met the eye. But before she could respond, a sudden commotion shattered the moment. The doors to the ballroom burst open, and a group of armed Crolians stormed in, their scales flashing with the colors of rage. "Death to the human invaders," the leader shouted, raising his plasma rifle. "Kroll will never submit." In an instant, Jack was in motion, pushing Zara behind him as he drew his own weapon. His eyes were hard, his stance that of a warrior ready for battle. The next few moments were a blur of plasma fire and screams. Jack moved with a speed and precision that seemed almost inhuman, taking down attacker after attacker with ruthless efficiency. Zara, too, fought with the ferocity of a Crolian royal, her own plasma blade flashing in deadly arcs. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, human and Crolian united against a common threat. When the last attacker fell, Jack turned to Zara, his breath coming hard. "Are you all right, Princess?" Zara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. This human had risked his life for her, had fought beside her as an equal. Perhaps there was more to this alliance than she had wanted to believe. "I am unharmed, Ambassador," she said softly. "Thanks to you." As the security forces swarmed in, as the shock of the attack began to fade, a new understanding began to dawn between the human and the Crolian. They had seen each other's strength, each other's courage. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. In the face of adversity, they had found a glimmer of common ground, and in the tumultuous days to come, that glimmer would be more important than either of them could have possibly imagined. Uneasy allies. In the aftermath of the attack, the palace was a hive of activity. Security was tightened, investigations were launched, and in the midst of it all, Princess Zara and Ambassador Jack Sawyer found themselves thrust into a new role. The public face of the Crolian-Human Alliance. It was a duty neither of them had anticipated, but one they couldn't refuse. The attack had shaken the fragile trust between their kinds, and it was up to them to restore it. In press conferences and public appearances, they stood side by side, a united front against those who would tear them apart. Zara spoke of the long friendship between Kroll and Terra Prime, of the shared values that bound them. Jack emphasized the strength that could be found in diversity, the ways in which their differences made them stronger. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was less idyllic. Zara and Jack were still virtual strangers, bound by duty, but not yet by trust. They argued, they debated, they challenged each other at every turn. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. In the late hours of the night, as they pored over security reports and intelligence briefings, they began to see glimpses of each other's true selves. Zara saw the keen intellect behind Jack's soldier exterior, the deep well of compassion that drove his every action. She saw a man who truly believed in the alliance, who was willing to give everything for the cause of peace. Jack, in turn, saw the fierce devotion Zara had for her people, the way she bore the weight of her responsibilities with unflinching grace. He saw a leader who would do anything to protect those she loved, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. Slowly, tentatively, they began to open up to each other. Zara shared stories of her childhood, of the pressures of growing up as a royal in a time of galactic tension. Jack spoke of his own journey, from a young soldier fighting in the frontier wars to a diplomat seeking to prevent the very conflicts he once waged. But even as they grew closer, the shadow of threat still loomed. More incidents followed the initial attack. sabotaged ships, assassinated officials, whispers of a greater conspiracy at work. Zara and Jack found themselves at the center of an investigation that reached to the highest levels of both their governments. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, not even with each other. One night, as they worked late in Zara's private study, an urgent message came through on Jack's secure line. His face grew grim as he read it, his jaw clenching with tension. "What is it?" Zara asked, her scales flickering with concern. Jack looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a warning. From an old friend in Terran intelligence. He says there's a traitor in the palace. Someone close to us." Zara's heart raced, her mind spinning with possibilities. A traitor in the palace. Who could it be? Who could they trust? As if reading her thoughts, Jack reached out, his hand covering hers. "We can trust each other, Zara. I know we can." It was the first time he had used her name without her title. The first time he had touched her outside of their public facade. Zara looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of his warm, human skin against her cool, iridescent scales. It felt right, somehow. Like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. She looked up, her eyes locking with his. "Then let's find this traitor, Jack. Together." It was a moment of understanding, a moment of true alliance. As they dove into the investigation, as they followed the trail of clues into the darkest corners of the palace, they knew they were no longer just princess and ambassador. They were partners. They were friends. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were something more. But the path ahead was dark and full of danger. The conspiracy was deeper than they had ever imagined, and the price of failure was higher than they dared to contemplate. In the shadows of the Crolian palace, a human and an alien fought side by side, bound by a trust forged in the fire of adversity. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. They could only hope they were strong enough to bear it. An unlikely connection. The investigation took Zara and Jack to the farthest reaches of the Crolian Empire, from the glittering spires of the capital to the shadowy depths of the underworld. They chased leads and dodged assassins, always one step ahead of the conspiracy that sought to destroy them. But in the midst of the chaos, something else was growing. A connection, a bond that neither of them had expected. It started small. A shared glance, a wordless moment of understanding. A touch that lingered just a heartbeat too long. But as the days turned into weeks, as they faced danger and betrayal at every turn, those small moments began to add up. One night, holed up in a dingy safe house on the outskirts of the Empire, Zara found herself opening up to Jack in a way she never had before. "I never wanted this, you know," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the flickering light of the room's single lamp. "The arranged marriage, the politics, any of it. I just wanted to serve my people, to make a difference." Jack was silent for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I understand," he said at last. "More than you might think." And then he began to talk. About his own journey, about the weight of expectation that had been placed on his shoulders since he was a child, about the horrors he had seen in the frontier wars, the scars that still haunted his dreams. Zara listened, her heart aching for this human who had endured so much. She saw the pain in his eyes, the loneliness that mirrored her own. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand resting on his. "You're not alone, Jack. Not anymore." Jack looked at her, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, Zara thought she had overstepped, that she had shattered the fragile bond between them. But then, slowly, Jack turned his hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "Neither are you, Zara." It was a moment of perfect understanding, a connection that transcended species and culture. In that moment, they weren't a human and a Crolian, a soldier and a princess. They were just two souls, finding comfort in each other amidst the storm. But the calm couldn't last. The next day, their investigation led them into the heart of the underworld, to a meeting with an informant who promised the key to unraveling the conspiracy. It was a trap. They were ambushed, surrounded by a force of mercenaries with orders to kill. They fought back to back, Zara's plasma blade flashing, Jack's blaster firing. But it wasn't enough. A plasma bolt caught Jack in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. Zara screamed, a sound of pure, primal rage, and launched herself at the attackers with a ferocity she had never known. She fought like a demon, her scales flashing crimson, until the last mercenary fell. Then she was at Jack's side, cradling his head in her lap, her tears falling onto his face. "Stay with me, Jack," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, stay with me." Jack's eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. "Zara," he whispered, his hand reaching up to touch her face. But before he could finish, his eyes slipped closed, his hand falling limply to his side. Zara's heart stopped. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The thought of losing Jack, of facing this fight without him, it was more than she could bear. But she was a princess of Kroll. She didn't break. She fought. With a strength born of desperation, she gathered Jack into her arms and activated her emergency beacon. As she waited for help to arrive, she made a silent vow. She would save Jack Sawyer. She would unravel this conspiracy and bring the traitors to justice. And she would never, never let him go. Because somewhere along the way, in the midst of the danger and the chaos, Jack had become more than just a partner, more than just a friend. He had become her heart, and she would fight for him until her last breath. Conspiracy revealed. The medical bay of the Krolian Palace was a hive of activity, doctors and nurses working frantically to stabilize Ambassador Jack Sawyer. Princess Zara stood watch, her scales a dull, listless gray, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. He looked so vulnerable, so human, lying there amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. Zara's heart clenched at the sight. She had never realized how much she had come to depend on his strength, his steadiness in the face of adversity. Now, with him hanging in the balance, she felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty and fear. But she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not with so much at stake. Steeling herself, Zara turned to the lead doctor, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Will he survive?" The doctor, an elder Krolian with scales of muted green, bowed his head respectfully. "We believe so, Your Highness. The ambassador is strong, and our technology is advanced, but he will need time to heal." Zara nodded, her relief a palpable thing. Jack would live. That was all that mattered. But even as one fear eased, another loomed. The conspiracy, the traitors in the heart of the palace. They were still out there. And Zara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they would strike again. She needed to act, needed to find the truth. But she couldn't do it alone. With a last, lingering look at Jack's unconscious form, Zara turned and strode from the medical bay, her steps filled with purpose. She had calls to make, favors. Zara's investigations led her deep into the shadows of the Krolian government, to whispers of corruption and betrayal at the highest levels. She followed the money, tracked the flow of illicit weapons and stolen intel, piecing together a puzzle that grew more disturbing with every revelation. At the center of it all was a name, a ghost from Jack's past, that sent chills down Zora's spine. Colonel Thane Rykov, the notorious war criminal from the frontier wars. Rykov had vanished after the wars, presumed dead by the Terran authorities. But Zara's evidence suggested a different story. Rykov was alive, and he was pulling the strings of the anti-alliance conspiracy. But why? What did he stand to gain from sabotaging the peace? The answer, when it came, was both simple and terrifying. Rykov wasn't interested in peace. He was interested in power. And what better way to seize power than to plunge the galaxy into chaos and war? Zara's heart raced as the final pieces fell into place. Rykov was planning an attack, a strike so devastating that it would shatter the Alliance and set Kroll and Terra Prime at each other's throats. And the key to his plan was none other than Zara herself. The arranged marriage, the public appearances, the carefully cultivated image of unity. It was all a setup. Rykov knew that if he could assassinate Zara on the day of the wedding, in full view of the galaxy, he could ignite the spark of war. Zara felt sick, her scales rippling with horror. All this time, she and Jack had been playing right into Rykov's hands. But now that she knew the truth, she could fight back. She could stop Rykov and save the Alliance. Save her people. Save Jack. If only it were that simple. Because as Zara delved deeper, she discovered a final, terrible truth. Rykov wasn't acting alone. He had allies, powerful figures within both the Krolian and Terran governments. Figures who were willing to sacrifice millions of lives for their own gain. Figures like Zara's own father, King Aldrich. The betrayal cut like a knife, sharp and deep. Zara had always known her father was ambitious. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her world was crumbling around her, everything she had ever believed in called into question. Her duty to her people warred with her loyalty to Jack, to the alliance they had fought so hard to build. She was torn, caught between two worlds, two futures, and she knew with a terrible certainty that no matter what she chose, there would be no going back. In the end, it was Jack who made the decision for her. Jack, who woke from his coma with fire in his eyes and a plan on his lips. "We have to stop them, Zara," he said, his voice rough with pain and determination. "We have to stop Rykov and your father, no matter the cost." Zara looked at him, at this human who had become so much more than just an ally. He was her partner, her friend, her love. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. "Together," she said, her voice ringing with a new strength, "we'll stop them together." It was a vow, a promise, a pact sealed in blood and fire. They would face the coming storm side by side, human and Krolian, united against the forces that sought to tear them apart. They would fight for their love, for their people, for the future they believed in. Or they would die trying. For two worlds. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect Krolian morning. The palace was a flurry of activity, servants rushing to and fro, dignitaries from 100 worlds arriving in a steady stream. But amidst the bustle and the grandeur, a darker current ran. Princess Zara and Ambassador Jack Sawyer moved through the preparations like ghosts, their smiles fixed, their eyes shadowed with the knowledge of what was to come. They had made their plan, set their pieces on the board. Now, all that remained was to play out the final, desperate gambit. As Zara took her place at the altar, resplendent in her wedding gown, she scanned the crowd, her heart pounding. There in the front row sat her father, King Aldrich, his expression a mask of paternal pride. But Zara knew the truth that lay beneath that mask, knew the treachery that festered in her father's heart. Beside Aldrich sat Colonel Thane Rykov, his presence a shock to those who had believed him dead. He looked older, his face lined with scars, but his eyes burned with the same malevolent fire Zara had seen in Jack's memories. The ceremony began, the ancient rites of Krolian unity echoing through the grand chamber. But even as Zara spoke her vows, her attention was elsewhere, focused on the small, innocuous device hidden in her bouquet. A device that, when activated, would send a signal to the Terran fleet waiting in orbit, ready to descend on the palace at a moment's notice. It was a desperate plan, a gamble with the highest of stakes. But it was the only way to expose Rykov and Aldrich's treachery, to stop their plot before it could plunge the galaxy into war. The moment came. The device activated with a small, unobtrusive click. And then, chaos erupted. Terran soldiers stormed the palace, weapons drawn, while Krolian guards, loyal to Zara and the true ideals of the Alliance, moved to intercept Rykov's hidden forces. In the heart of it all, Zara and Jack fought side by side, a whirlwind of plasma fire and deadly grace. They cut through Rykov's men like a scythe through wheat, moving in perfect sync, as if they had been fighting together all their lives. But Rykov was cunning, and he had planned for even this eventuality. From the shadows, his assassins struck, their weapons aimed not at Zara, but at Jack. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat an eternity, as Zara watched the plasma bolt streak towards Jack's unprotected back. She moved without thinking, throwing herself in front of him, taking the bolt meant for him. Pain exploded through her, searing, blinding. She felt herself falling, heard Jack's cry of anguish as he caught her, cradled her in his arms. Through the haze of pain, she saw her father, saw the moment of realization dawn in his eyes, saw the horror, the guilt, the shame of what he had done. "Zara," King Aldrich whispered, his voice broken. "What have I done?" But it was too late for regrets, too late for apologies. The battle raged on, the fate of worlds hanging in the balance. With a last, desperate effort, Zara raised her hand, her fingers intertwining with Jack's. "Together," she whispered, her voice a thin, fading thread. "Remember, together." And then the world went black, and she knew no more. When Zara awoke, it was to a world forever changed. The conspiracy had been exposed, Rykov and his allies arrested or killed in the fighting. The Terran-Krolian alliance, tested to its limits, had emerged stronger than ever. And Jack was at her side, his eyes wet with unshed tears, his hand warm and strong in hers. "You saved me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved us all." Zara smiled, her heart full to bursting. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "As partners, as equals, as—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. But Jack understood. He always understood. "As love," he finished, his voice soft and sure. "As love." And there, in the heart of the Krolian palace, amidst the wreckage of battle and the dawn of a new era, Princess Zara and Ambassador Jack Sawyer sealed their union with a kiss. A kiss of hope, of promise. A kiss of two worlds, two hearts, forever intertwined. A new dawn. The news spread like wildfire, rippling out from the Krolian palace to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Princess Zara and Ambassador Jack Sawyer, heroes of the Terran-Krolian alliance, had uncovered and defeated a conspiracy that threatened to plunge the galaxy into war. In the days that followed, as the dust of battle settled, the true scope of their achievement began to dawn on the galactic community. It wasn't just the exposure of the conspiracy, the rooting out of corruption at the highest levels of power. It was the way Zara and Jack had done it. Together, as equals, as partners in every sense of the word. Their bond, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by the depth of their love, had become a symbol of something greater. A symbol of unity, of cooperation, of the strength that could be found in diversity. Across the galaxy, old prejudices began to crumble, old hatreds to fade. If a human and a Krolian could find such profound connection, such unshakable trust, then perhaps the differences that divided the galactic races were not so insurmountable after all. In the halls of power, a new vision began to take shape, a vision of a galaxy united, of a future where the strengths of each race could be harnessed for the good of all. And at the center of this vision were Zara and Jack. As they recovered from their wounds, both physical and emotional, they found themselves drawn into a whirlwind of political activity. There were treaties to be signed, alliances to be forged, a new order to be built from the ashes of the old. It was exhausting work, the weight of galaxies on their shoulders. But through it all, they had each other. In the quiet moments, the stolen hours between the endless meetings and negotiations, they began to plan their future. Not just as political figureheads, but as a couple, as partners in life as well as in leadership. They spoke of their hopes, their dreams, the family they might one day build. They spoke of the challenges they knew they would face, the obstacles they would have to overcome. But most of all, they spoke of their love. The love that had sustained them through the darkest of times, the love that now burned brighter than any star in the galaxy. And as the plans for their wedding began to take shape, a true wedding, a celebration of choice and commitment rather than political necessity, they knew that this love would be the foundation upon which they would build a new future. A future of exploration, of discovery, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. A future where human ingenuity and Crowleyan wisdom could combine to unlock the secrets of the universe. On the day of their wedding, as they stood hand in hand before the assembled dignitaries of 100 worlds, Zara and Jack made a vow. A vow to always stand together, to face whatever challenges the future might bring as one. A vow to lead not just with strength, but with compassion, with understanding, with the belief that in diversity there is power, and in unity there is hope. As they sealed their vow with a kiss, the cheers of the galaxy echoing in their ears, Zara and Jack knew that their journey was just beginning. They had fought for peace, for understanding, for the right to choose their own destiny. Now they would fight to build the future they had dreamed of. A future of two worlds, two peoples, two hearts, forever united. A future of endless possibilities, stretching out before them like the stars themselves. A future bright with the promise of a new dawn. The end.